In this unit, we're going to go over nonverbal communication in the family. The corresponding chapter in your textbook is Chapter 12, and don't forget to submit your reading responses on Monday night, because I'll be holding an online conference for an hour on Tuesday that will start at our regular class time, and during this hour, I can address any questions that anyone has on this unit. We're going to focus on 3 aspects of family: marriage and relationships, children and their development, and nonverbal communication with the elderly. So what makes a home a home? The home is the environment in which we can most freely express ourselves. One of the first dimensions of nonverbal communication in the home is the spatio-temporal dimension. These are the factors of the home that we perceive rather than what we observe. For example, when families move into a new house, after a while someone will say, "The place finally feels like home." Nothing has actually changed except for their perception of the home itself. The environment of the home can affect the nonverbal communication of its inhabitants. The physical layout may have an impact and will reflect who the home belongs to. For example, a dorm room may be gloomy for some people, but another student may regard it as their home away from home during the school year. The objects in the home display information too. From the decor to the degree of cleanliness, everything is giving clues as to the personalities of the family that lives there. The home territory is seen as one of our most inviolate areas. What this essentially means is that once we're at home, we feel we should be 100% and unquestioningly safe. The concepts of space and territory are influenced in the home by several factors. While we're in the home, we use markers to establish how our home territory is used and defended. These can vary from keep off the lawn signs to trying to keep a sibling out of your room. Different spaces in the home afford us different degrees of privacy. The bathroom being the most private, followed by the bedroom, which is the common place for cocooning behaviors to take place. The living room or backyard areas would be viewed as community areas. Oftentimes, our personalities sort of establish which territory in the home belongs to us. For example, if you love to garden, the backyard and other lawn areas will most likely be seen as yours. It should also be noted that cultural backgrounds will greatly affect privacy requirements and territory needs. Touch inside the home. Inside the home, touch behaviors become idiosyncratic, meaning that touch is unique within each home and within each family. The norms for touch that are usually enforced in public areas are virtually non-existent within the home, and this is partially due to the level of intimacy within families and the privacy that the home affords. Family co-orientation of touch is the idea that members of a family that live under the same roof usually have the same types of nonverbal orientations as other members of the same family. For example, some families will afford each other larger amounts of personal space, while others will not afford other members of the family hardly any personal space at all. Family members may also have similar touch orientations. If one person in the family is a high toucher or even a hugger, the rest of the household members are also likely to adopt that same touch orientation. Let's not forget that touch orientation and other nonverbal norms within the home are greatly influenced by culture. These things will vary depending on whether or not the family is high or low context and other cultural variables. Temporal and olfactory elements in the home are different than those in public. For example, each home has its own unique olfactory signature. Your house is going to smell differently to you than it will to others, and it's this olfactory signature that communicates information about who lives there. The signature can give us clues as to the ethnic and cultural background of the inhabitants, and this is particularly true if there are distinctive ingredients commonly used in the cooking. For example, my mom makes a lot of pasta and meals with typical Italian seasonings, and you can pretty much smell it as soon as you walk in the door. Another thing the olfactory signature can tell you is the hygienic habits of the residents. Kinesic and physical appearance in the home have different meanings as well. Facial and body displays are more open, and our body posture becomes more relaxed. This is because you don't have to worry about putting your best face forward or dressing to impress when you're at home. Also worth noting is that families may create emblems or certain illustrators that have specific and idiosyncratic meanings. Vocalics in the home change as well. There's more silence within the home typically, but it can also go the opposite way. For example, small children that know well enough to behave in public may let loose when they get home, becoming more verbally expressive and increasing in their loudness. Okay, marriage and committed relationships. For those of you that live or have lived with a significant other, some of this may sound familiar to you. Nonverbal behaviors are better indicators of distress in a marriage or relationship than the verbal messages may allude to. For example, when someone says, "It's fine," can either mean that everything is fine or that everything is anything but fine, right? Sometimes the nonverbal behaviors are the only clues we get as to the possible distress in a relationship. It's pretty easy to pretend to be happy verbally, but having to control your tone of voice, posture, and facial expressions on top of that can be way more difficult. The ability to accurately decode the messages of your partner is an important aspect of relational satisfaction. The more you each understand about the other's nonverbal cues, the more satisfied you're both likely to be in your relationship. Nonverbal intimacy also plays a role in relational satisfaction. For example, couples that hug each other often and display higher cues of immediacy are often more happy than couples that are less intimate. So how does the environment impact relationships? The family, relational, and social aspects operate together. This means if one partner becomes unemployed, the family as a whole may experience financial hardships, resulting in possible environmental changes. For example, if you can no longer afford to live in a certain area, you may be forced to move to a less desirable neighborhood. When it comes to forming the home environment, a decision-making hierarchy is established. Essentially, there's one partner that may have the power of veto when it comes to decisions, and this may change depending on which environment it is within the home. When it comes to personal space, satisfied couples usually require less. This can, however, depend on co-orientations of the individuals and their cultures. However, the increased need for territory and personal space is usually an indicator of distress across the board. Touch in relationships is a two-way street. Generally, the more positive touch in a relationship, the more satisfied the relationship is. Unfortunately, there are also cases where touch in a relationship is harmful and violent, as exemplified during the past couple years with cases in the NFL. For kinesics and vocalics, remember that the better you are at interpreting your partner's cues, the higher degree of satisfaction you're likely to have. There's also something known as synchrony behaviors, which is the tendency of couples to unconsciously mirror one another in their behaviors. And when it comes to silence, remember that the presence of silence is typically a good thing, but not too much of it, as can be experienced when you're either receiving or giving someone the silent treatment. How couples use time can also indicate satisfaction. The more task-oriented communication present, like one partner bringing their work home often, the chances are increased that dissatisfaction in the relationship is not far off. Physical appearance can also vary over the lifespan of each relationship. When you're first dating, attractiveness and physical appearance can be more important and less important at the same time. On the one hand, you may want to look as good as possible to impress the other person, and the concept of putting your best face forward is at work here. On the other hand, it can be considered less important if these early stages of dating are not taken seriously, or one person in the equation does not see it lasting long term. Discrepancies in levels of attractiveness are seen when there is a gap between partners in terms of comparable attraction. The idea here is that most often, we seek out others that have similar levels of attractiveness to ourselves, and when there is a great difference in this, one of the partners may be more likely to experience dissatisfaction. Having children changes relationship dynamics, to say the least. One component of this is the extra space that is allocated to the child. For example, that extra bedroom or office is very likely to become the nursery or playroom once the baby is born. The bummer for new parents is that infants have literally no sense of time, making extended hours of sleep for the new parents extremely precious. Babies also have certain olfactory markers, and this can be due to things like baby powder or less desirable odors like a dirty diaper. The idea here is that when a family has a baby, the olfactory signature of their home will change. Spacing in births has also shown to have importance. Have you ever heard of the phrase, middle child syndrome. Part of the backing of this is evidence that the more children born to a family in shorter periods of time, the less protective or attentive a parent is likely to be. Okay, now we're going to go over some basic childhood development. Effective communication, or the ability to express and attribute meaning to emotions and moods, happens in three main stages of a child's development. The instinctive phase is from about birth to 6 months. During this time, the baby displays purely need-based behaviors, like crying. Think survival instincts for this stage. Even a baby understands the concept of, "I'm hungry, let's cry." The emotional phase can start as early as 2 weeks and last until about 2 or 3 years. This is when emotion gets associated with basic functions, and they usually operate at one extreme or another, contributing to the phrase terrible twos. During the objective phase, which begins at about 6 years, gestures and expressions are attributed and related to thoughts. These emotional messages are integrated into the communicative repertoire of the child. It's worth noting that children who are raised in a more negative home environment are less likely to understand nonverbal emotional messages and may be more likely to violate social norms in this area later in life. Now let's talk about nonverbal communication with the elderly. Gerontology is the study of aging or the aged. And while senior citizens are an obvious extension of family, they are not as integral here in the United States as they are in other parts of the world. Some cultures live with their parents and grandparents their entire life, whereas here, that's much less common. The elderly experience changes in their ability to communicate nonverbally, possibly due to restricted sensory input and deterioration that comes naturally as we age. As we age, our sight and hearing become less acute, and we experience changes in appearance, like the onset of wrinkles, gray hair, or even changes in posture. While the elderly are, as mentioned in the units on haptics and proxemics, touched the least and afforded the most personal space, computer-mediated communication is giving some senior citizens the opportunity to reconnect with society and the younger generation. I, for one, have experienced this personally, as my grandmother, who is 79 FYI, just learned to use Facebook within the past 6 months. The elderly experience changes in their use of environment and space. As we age, we tend to lose mobility, both in everyday movement and in the ability to travel. This can be exacerbated by the presence of a fixed income, but this doesn't discourage everyone, which is why we see large populations of senior citizens in warm climates like Florida. As I mentioned on the last slide, the elderly are afforded the greatest amount of personal space and are the least touched, which can sometimes lead to social perceptions that they are lonely. While some may be lonely, this is not always the case. The vocalics of the elderly are changed as well. With age, our voices lose articulation and can have increased degrees of raspiness as more air passes over the glottis. Besides the occurrences of wrinkles and gray hair, as a sociological function of age, the elderly are afforded less money to spend on their physical appearance. Remember when I talked about fixed income? As I also mentioned, body language and posture will change, often becoming more hunched. Height is affected as well, as we all tend to lose an inch or two over time. Speaking of time, the time orientations of the elderly are more likely to be past orientations, and the olfactory senses will become less acute as time goes on. This is the end of the lecture, and we will meet in class as usual next week. Send me a message if you have any questions, or feel free to participate in the conference hour that will be held during the date and time indicated on our class page for this unit.